brother?
How are you?
Good. So,
Good,
um,
good to see you.
all right. It's good to see you, man, as always. So full disclosure, Alex is one of my dearest and oldest friends. But I think that gives us um, a pretty potent context for discussing his art. I was introduced to Alex by Ruth Bachhoffner in, man,
Been a long time ago. Been a long time back.
1999,
Yeah,
98. Um, and he had two beautiful babies in his arms.
that was a long
And
time ago. Yes.
but I've seen Alex's work progress, and I think something that's really been very important um, is that there's always been a consistency of aesthetic. He's always in motion aesthetically, but there has been this really strong consistency, be it the motif or just the language of the material. But it's been, professionally speaking, it's been really amazing to just be able to witness from where he was those 2 decades plus ago uh, to now. And I think that the current show is, I mean, I'd hate to use the word apotheosis, but it kind of seems like that's very fitting by in the same token. So that's my introduction. Alex, if you got, how would you like to
Well,
introduce?
I just want to say that I appreciate you and our friendship and put so much value on that. And you're talking about 2.5 decades of work and a relationship between you and I and our families, and that that holds a lot of weight with me. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time out to have this conversation, and value your opinion, and hold you in the highest regards with you and your work. And I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
So I guess let's influence. What are we thinking about? What are we looking at? Um, what's moving you in these directions, especially these new directions?
Yeah. Influence is a hard thing to answer, because that's like asking somebody what's their favorite song. Like I'm influenced by so many things, life in general, right? So I think influence is such kind of an amateur sort of maybe approach to being a painter, because so many things get archived up here throughout the course of living and your lifespan, and how those things come out and the timing of when they come out and how they manifest themselves are part of what keeps me interested, because I have things that I can reach back to when I was a kid that somehow come out of my work today. And so my influences range from everywhere and everything. It's not even visual. It's sometimes smelling things and touching things, and just experiencing life, and I think that all feeds itself into my work. Now, on a surface level, you can look at the work and you can say, well, he's influenced, being a painter from Los Angeles, there's kind of movements and styles. There's light and space and finish fetish and all these, hard edge geometry, and all these things that feed the work. And I would be, blind to say that the work is not informed by these things, because obviously it is. And growing up here in California, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. And architecture was really great to me. Design, car design, I grew up skateboarding, I grew up surfing at the beach, and all these things hold a place in my head. And they come out in these paintings in some form or another. Um, so to answer, what are my main influence, that's a hard one, because I guess life, and you mentioned when we first met, my two kids, my two girls, my daughters, Nani and Miley. They've been a huge influence in me. They've been in and out of the studio. They've been painting with me. They've been part of my journey, and just something as simple as hearing them laugh is what keeps me going and motivated.
It is an amazing thing to have your daughter in the studio.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah.
I've been
Well, and
enjoying
so
that.
many artists are no, my studio is away from the house and I need to drive to get there and work. I get that. But for me, I enjoyed having the dog run through and the dog being there and my kids being part of the action. And, it's all life. It's all things that happen in
Yep,
your daily routine, and that feeds your paintings or your artwork, whatever you make. I believe, it feeds my work,
no,
and
100%.
very important. Yeah.
So I guess bringing up Southern California, when I look back on when I first started spending time and making work
Hmm.
in LA, the LA area, Southern California, um, I was really blown away by how many amazing painters were practicing and out there.
Yeah.
Um, and then I, started going more into the tradition of Southern California painting. And one thing, coming from New York, one thing that really hit me is the technical application that just seems to run through the painting of Southern, the tradition of Southern
Right.
California painting.
Right.
Um, and I know you had a very close relationship with Karl Benjamin, but I think if could you touch on that aspect of it, the
Yeah,
literal
of course.
technical application?
Well, I think, in your question, you mentioned a couple things, actually, New York and Los Angeles and studying with Carl Benjamin. In grad school, that was like, it was a really big deal for me because it really kind of opened my eyes and pushed me in a direction on several levels. Aesthetically, having a work ethic, having a mindset towards what a studio practice means. And, in New York at the time, of the AbX painters, on the West Coast, talking about our history, there was a backlash against that, where we had the abstract classicists, and everything was about abstract geometry, and where East Coast, West Coast, if you want to even call it that, that's even a thing anymore. But there was such a form of expression, and the paint speaking and all this stuff. And on the West Coast, it's more about the control of the paint, and let's keep these hard edges and keep things clean and mimic the light and mimic the color and all these things. So it was very different. So, I was always in tune. I mean, some of my favorite painters were of the abstract expressionist New York school. And I studied that and I looked at that. And again, talking about archiving, in this new body of work, there's a lot of marks that are very gestural and expressive in my paintings. And that's sort of touching back on my interests of the Ab X painters. But at the same time, growing up on the West Coast and getting to study with, somebody like Carl Benjamin and being around that mindset, um, that started getting my work to look a certain way. And I think about going back and another influence, my father, who worked as an engineer, everything was very specific, very tight and very controlled. And I feel that that is a big component of my work, is controlling the material. And instead of the material controlling the artist, it's the artist controlling the material. I don't ever want the material to tell me what to do. It could push me in a direction, but ultimately, as a painter, I have complete control over what I'm doing with the material and the marks that I make. Um, Going back to my um schooling, my academic years, I was trained as an illustrator. And I could draw and paint from the figure. I could be as hyper real if I as I wanted to, but it just doesn't interest me, And so I
Mhm.
started studying painting, and I started to study the history of painting and what all this means. It's not only making a painting, but if you're participating, where do I fit into this conversation? What's my contribution? And so, you become more informed. You read, you look, you pay attention, you see what your contemporaries are doing. And how do I fit into this? Where do I want to be? And for me, it's always been this love of merging the control with the sort of like not in control. I know that's a very simplistic way of defining that,
No,
but
no, no, no.
it's
No,
walking this line
100%.
of I think Peter Franks mentioned one time, it's the perfection of imperfection or something like that. It's the two kind of, it's the balance. And that's something we could talk about too, is balance, because I think everything I do in my life is about that balance and how one thing sets off the other and so
Well,
on.
I remember, since you brought up balance, I remember 15 years ago, in the midst of raising a family,
Hmm.
you were talking to me about creating that balance or trying to strive for that balance.
Sure.
But I think that that's a really interesting point with this latest body of work is, there is the tight control, there is the meticulous line, the precision, but all of a sudden we've got these painterly elements that are just, for me, breathing a, a new life uh, into the format. Um, and I think it's been really beautiful to see your hand
Hmm.
in the work. And I think that of balance, that you've really done a fabulous job balancing
Well,
that.
thank you. And I feel this show is a moment, I got about halfway through making the body of work for this show. And, and as things do, everything at times comes out of an accident, right? And I had some paint that I dripped. And in my process, I'm always editing. So even the mistakes are highly edited. And those drips, I really sat there and I thought about it for a while because my first move was to go and redo the surface, paint them out, sand
Right.
them down, whatever. But I thought, so here I am, and it's not like I'm reinventing the wheel, but I looked at those marks in the context of my work and I thought, well, what if I paid attention to those and what happened was by paying attention to them, they took me in a direction that I used to not go down. I used to really be in control and edit those out. Those weren't purposely made. But now we have the accident, right? And so what do you do with it? And I'm looking, 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 and at some point it started to make sense. And I just went with it. And here we are, and it's really that simple. And I didn't try to overthink it. I just accepted it and paid attention to it. And it was a new voice in the language of my painting.
Yeah. I think it's, I look back to, again, years ago when you started using a small broom
Yeah.
on certain elements of the paintings.
Hmm.
Um, and there was suddenly this almost violent push pull,
All
if
right.
you will. Um, but yeah, yeah, I think that that naturalistic approach has really done something special.
Well, I like, working kind of in a more unorthodox kind of way where, I don't need to necessarily go to an art supply store to buy my materials. I look for things that are very non-traditional, like you just mentioned, the broom, right? And again, I don't think I'm rediscovering the wheel. This is something that's been done through a long period of art history here. But for me in my work, those are moments where I can start to show evidence of the hand and evidence of being in the moment and letting things happen in that moment. Um, the broom was one. I use big palette knives, uh, and that just starts to inform the work in ways that, over time, I think has moved it in new directions.
So that brings me, um, initially, I mean, the things are always happening in the studio,
Yeah.
regardless of an artist's practice. But are you thinking of color, form, or the graphic capacity of a work when?
So yeah, that's a great question. For me, it's just all visual language, and my work is there's not a narrative to it. There's not necessarily a commentary on anything other than just the aesthetics of it. And I do look at design, like I said, had a very formal training in design and graphics and so that comes out of my work. And of course I'm thinking about that, things about going back to balance, like visual balance. Like it's constantly about making visual decisions in a painting and arranging forms and thinking about which color works well together. Sometimes there's surprises in that, and again, going back to like the drips, that kicked my work off in a direction. And I feel that that opened a new kind of tone to the language I was using in the painting. But that's constantly, I don't know any painter who doesn't use an approach to design in their work. You have to use it regardless. I mean, um, but graphically, I think about what reads well, where your eye goes to, how your eye travels around the painting. It's a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Rigorous sort of process that I go through, and it's a lot of give and take. It's a lot of adding and subtracting, building up, tearing down, leaving, kind of like excavating, leaving history of what's been done underneath. And that pushing and pulling creates this sort of moment. And I choose to leave it or I choose to go with it. And at some point, I remember Carl Benjamin and I had a great conversation. It was like creating a painting is like raising a child, right? In the beginning, when the painting is a blank canvas, it needs a lot, just like a new baby does. So as you go through the process, you give and give and give, and then it starts needing less in return. So I listen to that language, the aesthetics, the dance, everything that I do. And when a painting in my head starts to become more finished, it needs less from the artist. And so, much like a child, as the child becomes older, it needs less from the parent. It's more self-sufficient and can go out in the world and take care of themselves, And it's always stuck with me, and I feel strongly about that because I think paintings are the same way. The question is, when's a painting finished? I don't know. It just kind of feels right, and it sort of talks back. You have this conversation. You sit in front of a painting, and it's back and forth in the head, and at some point, it just kind of tells me, like, leave me alone. Like, I'm good. Walk away because you can always overkill it
Go
too. And
away.
that's a fine line you walk too, it's the overkill. You don't want to overkill it. So, and I think maybe sometimes I've overkill paintings too, where I don't even know when do you stop. But it over the years I've learned to listen to it, and it's more clear to me when it speaks to me.
So, on a uh, thinking of you personally, you're a man of action, you're an artist, and we already discussed balance, but how do those how do those things come together? That interior monologue versus charging waves versus hiking in the mountains,
You got it.
etc.
I mean, in my head, you got to keep it moving, right? If you talk to anybody that's older, you know, you ask them simple questions. How did you make it to this point in your life? I mean, you got to keep moving. If you don't move, you fall apart. Things get crusty and crunchy, and you don't move right. So you got to keep moving, and that's mentally, that's in your head, that's in your soul, your heart, that's in your physical actions. But I'm active. I mean, I'm going every day, and even though if I'm not surfing big waves or dropping into a bowl on my skateboard, like I'm doing that in my head, and I'm always moving, and it's you have to also listen to, I think, when it's the right time to take a rest, because going back to the balance, I think sometimes just dropping out and laying in the sun and just being salty is super important for your life, because it feeds everything else. But
Mm-hmm.
you're always moving. And whether it's moving on paintings, like this show took me almost a year to make. And it was a grueling discipline process. Every day was something, and it was your mind is going, your body's going. These paintings, some of them are big, they're physical. How do I get them from point A to point B? It's all physical acts. But my take on that is that as soon as you stop moving, you're dead. You got to keep it rolling. Period. And
Sharks
that
have to
that
swim.
goes. What's that?
Sharks have to swim.
Yeah,
They never
exactly.
stop
You stop
swimming.
swimming. That's a good point right there. Sharks have to swim, but again, it's important too. Part of that movement is allowing yourself to be still and breathe, and pay attention to what's happening around you, because it can't just be you all the time. You got to pay attention to the environment.
How much of your time in the studio with a particular piece is the gaze, just meditating on the painting, or is
That's
it
a good question.
often
Yeah,
just
that's a great
in
question.
motion?
I like the gaze. I like being quiet. I like my solitude. I like the one-on-one interaction. I think what I do at times, as we do as painters and as art makers, is very selfish because it's me and the work, or you and the work, or and I like that moment. I like when it's quiet. I like the internal dialogue that happens. That also answers a lot of questions for me. And I tend to timing is a great thing too because you can work on paintings and all of a sudden you tend to kind of paint yourself into a corner and then how do I get out of this? And you can sit in front of it for as long as you want, but those answers aren't presenting themselves. And so you just put it away and go on to another one, and you're like,
Hmm.
well, that guy needs a timeout over there or something. Like he's not behaving and
Put
not
him in the
not
corner.
playing well with others, like
Right.
so you put them in the corner and you walk by it every day and you kind of look over every now and then. And when it's ready to come out and you have an idea about what you want to do with it, I think that's when the magic starts to happen again. But um, it's all that internal, like I don't think a lot of people know what happens in the studio. They look at the work, it's on the wall in the gallery or in the museum, wherever it ends up, and they don't understand the ups and downs of what happens in the studio, and I like that. That's where the action is for me. Of course, everything is about, also the end and how it manifests itself into a show or to getting to a collector's house or wherever they end up. But for me, the magic is always making the work.
Again, to retrace a few steps, but you did have a very close relationship with Carl Benjamin. I was wondering if you could just talk to relate to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, Carl, I knew coming out of school, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, and I did was another step. I wanted to make connections. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to know what the next move was in my career, and I thought graduate school was the right way to go. And in that, I was very fortunate to not only meet, and work with somebody like Carl Benjamin, but also Roland Rees, who was an amazing mentor to me at that point, and such an insight all the way up until his passing. Was a dear friend of mine, and the conversations I would have with these gentlemen were really incredible because we almost in those conversations didn't talk directly about painting or art. We talked about life and we talked about how are your kids? How's the family? Where have you been traveling lately? What are you doing? And somehow magically these conversations would circle back and end up in a very small amount of time talking about like the art, the paintings that were on the wall. But I realized after some time that those conversations were so valuable and dear to me because we talked about all these things that got me to make those paintings what they were. And again, going back to what my inspirations are, what my influences are, it's life. It's all these moments that happen, as you're awake and as you're living. And those things inform the paintings. And that was a huge deal. Of course, I have hundreds of smaller stories with these guys one on one. But I got so much out of it. And for me, when I went to graduate school, again, it was all about networking and making those connections. And those were two relationships I held on to until both of their passings and had a lot of regard and value to those relationships.
Yeah, Roland was um, he was really nice to me, and he
It's
had no
awesome.
reason to be. Like
Well, that and
I
that,
was just this guy from New York. And,
but it's
he
just
was.
that, it's minus the ego. And I just don't get that, and it's so not necessary, I feel. And I think if you're somebody who does serious work and good work and makes a difference, and you don't need to be that guy that's necessarily ego driven. You're welcoming to everybody, and that's definitely what Roland and Carl had. Very just beautiful human beings.
I think that's something that you know. I, I'm 58 now. Uh,
Yeah, so am I.
yeah, that's what. And I look back on
Great age.
you know 29, 30,
Right.
hanging out with men, late 50s, early 60s,
Yeah.
our age now. And there was this bitterness um, because of the, I guess, what at the time was a very competitive world in art. And I think that, that was something that I was really touched about in getting to know Roland,
Yeah.
was just the openness.
Well, and I
It
think,
wasn't,
he was a teacher. He was very humble as a human being, and he was a teacher, and that, comes with a spirit of sharing and you know, making friends and sharing your experiences with them. And I thought that was just so wonderful. And I try to do that as well. Aside from my studio practice, I work as an educator and um, sharing with kids, the younger generation, I think is such a magical thing. And I wish a lot more people were of that mindset.
yeah,
You know?
indeed. I guess in closing, I would like to say that the recent video Matt Gleason shot
Mhm.
was pretty special because I think that Matt, in discussing this new body of work, I think he hit on some things that, uh, maybe some people are missing it. Maybe there's some elements that aren't taken into consideration. Um, but I think he did a fine job. And again, just to close it up, I really am very happy for you, and I'm really honored to just to be able to have this little bit of
Oh
time.
man, as am I, dude. I mean, you're an ace. Love you, love the family. Matt Gleason, I've known him since the graduate school days, and I've always had a big respect for Matt. He calls it as he sees it. He's very honest. Sometimes it rubs people the wrong way, but he's always championed my work. He's always been a great support here in Los Angeles, and nothing but high regard for him. And yeah, he texted me. He said, "Hey, I saw your show. Congratulations." What a nice treat to see my name tagged in that, and then have Matt talk about the work. That was really nice. And going back to the context of what he was saying, even to me, brought up some valid points and some different ways of thinking about it, reflecting the work as kind of an echo of our times and talking about my process and materials and the application and how that relates to what's happening in the world today. Now, going into it when I make these paintings, it's purely aesthetical for me. Like I look at it and I think about making a picture, but he brought to light several points that whether they're archived up here and they come out subconsciously, I don't know, but love Matt and yeah, totally appreciate him and his support.
Yeah, I think
All
it
the way
was.
back from the early bergamot coagula days, like
Oh yeah,
that,
well,
that
yeah, as we
that's what
discussed.
I'm saying. He's been around for a long time, and I appreciate him. Huge respect. Yeah,
Indeed. All right, brother. Well, yeah, I'm I'm stoked for you.
I
Congratulations on an
appreciate you, and I
amazing body of
appreciate
work.
this talk, man. It really it means a lot. Yeah. So thank you.
Next one will be in person.
Yeah, for sure. Over a couple beers.
All
So
right, brother.
thanks,
Aloha.
man. Aloha. Appreciate it.